You're at the driving range working on your golf swing. You've got three different clubs to practice with: driver, 7-iron, and wedge. How do you organize your practice? Do you hit 50 balls with the driver, then 50 with the 7-iron, then 50 with the wedge? Or do you constantly switch between clubs, never hitting the same one twice in a row? This seemingly simple decision about how to structure practice has profound implications for how well you'll actually learn. And the answer from over 1,000 research studies might surprise you. What we're exploring today is one of the most counterintuitive findings in learning science. The practice that makes you look worse while you're doing it often produces the best long term results. This phenomenon, known as the contextual interference effect, challenges everything we think we know about skill development and has implications far beyond sports, affecting how we should approach learning music, languages, professional skills, and virtually any complex ability we want to master. The research we're examining today comes from systematic reviews and meta analyses covering thousands of athletes and learners, from beginners to elite performers, across sports ranging from basketball to golf to volleyball. What emerges is a fascinating paradox. The practice schedule that feels most effective and produces the best immediate results is often the worst for actual learning, while the practice that feels frustrating and produces more errors leads to superior long term performance. Let me paint you a picture of two basketball players learning to shoot from three different positions on the court. Player A uses blocked practice, taking 20 shots from the free throw line, then 20 from the left corner, then 20 from the right corner. During practice, player A looks fantastic. Their shooting percentage improves rapidly at each position. They develop a rhythm, and by the end of each block, they're sinking shot after shot with beautiful consistency. Player B uses random practice, never taking two shots from the same position in a row. Free throw, left corner, back to free throw, then right corner, then left corner, constantly switching. During practice, player B looks terrible compared to player A. They never develop a rhythm. Their shooting percentage is lower. They seem to be struggling, making more errors, constantly having to readjust. Here's the twist. Come back a week later and test both players, having them shoot from all three positions, plus a new position they've never practiced from. Player B, who looked worse during practice, will almost certainly outperform player A, not just slightly, but significantly. Player B will show better retention of what they learned and better transfer to the new position. This is the contextual interference effect in action, and it's been replicated across hundreds of studies in dozens of sports. The numbers from recent meta analyses are revealing. When researchers analyzed 37 studies involving athletes of all levels, they found that random practice led to better long term retention and transfer in about 20 to 21% more cases than blocked practice. While this might not sound like a huge difference, in the world of skill acquisition, where marginal gains matter, this is substantial. More importantly, the effect is most pronounced exactly where it matters most: in retention tests, days or weeks after practice, and in transfer tests, where skills must be adapted to new situations. But here's where it gets interesting: the benefit isn't universal. The research shows the strongest effects in young adults aged 20 to 24. Children often don't show the same benefit, possibly because they haven't yet developed the cognitive resources to handle the increased mental load of random practice. Highly skilled athletes sometimes don't show the effect either, potentially because they've already developed robust motor programs that don't benefit as much from the additional challenge. So, what's actually happening in the brain during random versus blocked practice? This is where the science gets really fascinating. When you practice in blocks, repeatedly performing the same skill, your brain can essentially keep the same motor program loaded and ready. It's like keeping a computer program open and just hitting run over and over. This is cognitively easy and produces good immediate performance, but it doesn't challenge your brain to do the hard work of learning. Random practice forces something called action plan reconstruction. Every time you switch tasks, your brain has to dump the previous motor program and rebuild a new one from scratch. It has to recall the relevant information, reconstruct the movement pattern, and adapt it to the current context. This is cognitively demanding and produces worse immediate performance, but it's exactly this effortful processing that drives learning. Think of it like the difference between recognizing an answer on a multiple choice test versus having to produce the answer from memory with no cues. Recognition is easier and makes you feel like you know the material, but production, though harder, creates stronger memory traces. Random practice is constantly forcing production rather than recognition. Neurobiological research adds another layer to our understanding. Studies using brain imaging and neurochemical analysis have found that random practice modulates GABAergic activity in the brain. GABA is the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter, and changes in GABA levels are associated with motor learning and memory consolidation. Random practice appears to create a neurochemical environment more conducive to long term retention, particularly in older adults where GABA function naturally declines. The elaborative processing hypothesis provides another explanation. When you constantly switch between skills, your brain engages in more elaborate processing, comparing and contrasting the different movements, noting similarities and differences, and building a richer, more detailed representation of each skill. It's like the difference between memorizing three separate phone numbers versus understanding the relationship between them. The relational processing, though more demanding, creates more retrieval routes and stronger memories. There's also the forgetting and reconstruction aspect. In blocked practice, you never really forget the skill because you're constantly refreshing it with each repetition. In random practice, you partially forget between attempts, and this forgetting followed by successful retrieval actually strengthens memory. It's counterintuitive, but forgetting is actually a crucial part of learning. Each time you successfully retrieve something you've partially forgotten, you strengthen that memory more than if you'd never forgotten it at all. The external focus of attention finding is particularly intriguing. Research shows that random practice naturally promotes an external focus of attention, meaning learners focus on the effects of their movements rather than the movements themselves. This external focus is consistently associated with better motor learning. When you're constantly switching tasks, you can't rely on internal bodily sensations as much because they're constantly changing. Instead, you focus on the outcome, the target, the goal, which paradoxically leads to better movement quality. Let's talk about what this means for real world application, because the implications extend far beyond sports. Musicians, for instance, often practice scales and pieces in blocks, working on one section until it's perfect before moving to the next. The research suggests they'd learn better by interleaving different sections, different pieces, different techniques, even though it would feel less productive in the moment. Language learners typically study vocabulary in blocks by category: all the food words, then all the clothing words, then all the transportation words. The contextual interference research suggests mixing these categories would lead to better retention and better ability to use the words in real conversation, even though it would make the initial learning feel harder. In professional training, we often teach skills in isolated blocks. Medical students might practice suturing for an hour, then wound cleaning for an hour, then patient communication for an hour. The research suggests interleaving these skills, though more challenging and seemingly less efficient, would produce doctors better able to perform under the varied demands of real clinical practice. The systematic increasing contextual interference approach offers a middle ground that's showing promising results. Instead of jumping straight from block to random practice, you gradually increase the interference. You might start with small blocks of 3 to 5 repetitions, then reduce to pairs, then finally move to fully random practice. This scaffolding approach helps learners handle the cognitive load while still getting the benefits of interference. Learner adapted practice is another innovative approach emerging from this research. Instead of prescribing a fixed practice schedule, the system adapts based on the learner's performance. When performance is stable and errors are low, interference increases. When the learner is struggling, interference temporarily decreases. This personalized approach recognizes that the optimal level of challenge varies between individuals and even within the same individual across different stages of learning. The research also reveals important distinctions between types of skills. Discrete skills with clear beginnings and ends, like a golf swing or a basketball shot, tend to show stronger contextual interference effects than continuous skills like running or swimming. Open skills that require adaptation to changing environments benefit more from random practice than closed skills performed in stable environments. Complex skills requiring multiple components show greater benefits than simple skills with single components. Task complexity interacts with expertise in interesting ways. For complete beginners learning complex skills, some blocking might be necessary initially just to understand what they're trying to do. But once basic coordination is achieved, introducing variability becomes beneficial. For experts, the benefits of random practice might be less pronounced because they've already developed robust, flexible motor programs through years of varied practice. The age factor is particularly important for coaches and teachers to understand. The strong effect in young adults but not in children suggests that practice schedules should be age appropriate. Children might benefit from more blocked practice or gentler forms of interference, while college aged athletes should embrace the challenge of random practice even when it feels frustrating. The implications for testing and assessment are profound. If you test immediately after practice, blocked practice will almost always look superior. This creates a dangerous illusion of learning. Coaches who evaluate their training methods based on immediate performance might conclude that blocked practice is better, when in reality, they're mistaking performance for learning. True learning can only be assessed after a delay, when the temporary performance benefits of blocked practice have dissipated. This distinction between performance and learning is crucial and often misunderstood. Performance is what you can do right now, in this moment, under current conditions. Learning is a relatively permanent change in capability that persists over time and transfers to new situations. These are not the same thing, and what optimizes one often undermines the other. The transfer findings are particularly important for sports and other complex skills. Athletes don't just need to perform practiced skills, they need to adapt those skills to game situations that are never exactly like practice. The basketball player needs to shoot with a defender in their face with different timing from slightly different positions. The tennis player needs to hit returns from serves they've never seen before. Random practice better prepares performers for this kind of adaptive flexibility. Some fascinating research has looked at what happens when you combine random practice with other learning principles. For instance, when random practice is combined with reduced feedback frequency, another counterintuitive learning principle, where less feedback leads to better learning, the effects can be additive. When combined with an external focus of attention, the benefits multiply. These interactions suggest that optimal practice involves multiple challenges to the learner, not just one. The motivational implications of this research create an interesting challenge. Random practice is more frustrating, produces more errors, and makes learners feel less competent. This can reduce motivation and potentially lead to dropout. Coaches and teachers need to educate learners about the performance learning distinction and help them understand that struggle is not a sign of poor learning, but actually a catalyst for it. Some innovative approaches are emerging to handle this motivational challenge. One is to use blocked practice for warm up and cool down, providing learners with some experience of fluent performance while using random practice for the main learning portion. Another is to track and celebrate learning gains over time rather than immediate performance, helping learners see that their struggle is producing results. The differential learning approach takes variability to an extreme, suggesting that no two practice attempts should be exactly the same. Every repetition involves some deliberate variation in execution. While this might seem to contradict traditional ideas about building consistent technique, research shows it can lead to more robust and adaptable skills. The brain apparently learns not by repetition of identical movements, but by exploring the solution space and discovering what varies and what remains constant. Virtual reality and technology are opening new possibilities for implementing these principles. VR can create practice environments that naturally enforce variability, presenting slightly different scenarios each time. Apps can structure practice schedules that would be difficult to manage manually, automatically randomizing practice orders and adapting to performance. The implications for rehabilitation and motor relearning after injury are significant. Traditional rehabilitation often uses blocked practice, having patients repeat the same exercise many times before moving to the next. The contextual interference research suggests that once basic movement is possible, introducing variability might lead to better functional recovery and transfer to daily activities. There are some important caveats to consider. The research primarily comes from relatively simple laboratory tasks or sports skills. How these principles apply to extremely complex skills like surgery or piloting aircraft needs more investigation. Safety considerations might override learning optimization in some contexts. You wouldn't want a surgeon randomly practicing different procedures on actual patients, even if it might theoretically produce better learning. The measurement challenge is also real. Most studies measure retention after days or weeks, but what about months or years? Does the advantage of random practice persist over very long time scales? Some limited evidence suggests it does, but more longitudinal research is needed. There's also the question of whether skills learned through random practice are more resistant to decay during periods of no practice. Individual differences in response to practice schedules need more attention. While the average effect favors random practice, some individuals might genuinely learn better with blocked practice. Identifying these individuals and understanding why they respond differently could lead to more personalized learning approaches. Factors like working memory capacity, previous experience, and anxiety levels might all influence which practice schedule works best. The ecological validity question remains partially unanswered. Most research happens in controlled settings with prescribed practice schedules, but real world practice is often messier, with natural variation, interruptions, and constraints that might already introduce contextual interference. How much additional benefit comes from deliberately structuring random practice in already variable real world settings needs more investigation. Recent research has started exploring hybrid schedules that might optimize both performance and learning. For instance, the small blocks approach uses runs of 3 to 4 repetitions before switching, providing some rhythm and consistency while still maintaining interference. The serial practice approach orders tasks in a predictable sequence rather than random order, providing structure while avoiding excessive blocking. The implications for education are transformative. The traditional approach of teaching subjects in isolated blocks, mastering one topic completely before moving to the next, might be fundamentally flawed. Interleaving different topics, though more challenging for both teachers and students, could produce better long term retention and transfer. Some schools are already experimenting with interleaved math curricula, where instead of spending 3 weeks on quadratic equations, then 3 weeks on trigonometry, students encounter mixed problem sets requiring them to identify which approach to use. This connects to the broader literature on desirable difficulties in learning. Challenges that slow down initial learning but enhance long term retention and transfer are called desirable difficulties. Contextual interference is perhaps the clearest example, but others include spacing practice over time, testing instead of restudying, and varying practice conditions. These difficulties are desirable because they enhance learning, but they're still difficulties, making the learning process feel harder and less successful. For coaches and athletes, the practical message is clear but challenging. Embrace the struggle of random practice, especially during main practice sessions when learning is the goal. Save blocked practice for warm ups, skill introduction, or when building confidence is more important than optimizing learning. educate athletes about why practice should feel challenging and why immediate performance isn't the goal. For anyone learning any skill, from playing piano to speaking Spanish to coding, the principle suggests mixing different aspects of what you're learning rather than perfecting one before moving to the next. Yes, it will feel more frustrating. Yes, you'll make more errors. Yes, your progress will seem slower. But when it matters, when you need to perform days or weeks later, when you need to adapt your skills to new situations, you'll be far better prepared. The research also suggests being suspicious of practice methods that make you feel too competent too quickly. If practice feels easy and you're performing well immediately, you might be optimizing performance at the expense of learning. The feeling of struggle, of having to work to retrieve and reconstruct skills, is actually a sign that learning is happening, not a sign that you're doing it wrong. As we look to the future, several exciting directions are emerging. Researchers are exploring whether the principles of contextual interference apply to cognitive skills like problem solving and decision making, not just motor skills. Early evidence suggests they do, which could revolutionize how we approach education and training across all domains. Neurotechnology might soon allow us to directly measure learning related brain changes during practice, optimizing interference levels in real time based on neural markers rather than behavioral performance. Artificial intelligence could create adaptive practice systems that automatically adjust not just difficulty, but the type and amount of interference based on individual learning patterns. The integration of contextual interference with other learning principles continues to reveal synergies. Combining random practice with mental practice, observational learning, or explicit instruction might produce effects greater than the sum of their parts. Understanding these interactions could lead to practice protocols that dramatically accelerate skill acquisition. In conclusion, the contextual interference effect reveals a fundamental truth about learning. The path that feels easiest is rarely the path that leads to mastery. Random practice, with all its frustration and apparent inefficiency, builds the kind of robust, flexible, adaptable skills that perform when it matters. The research spanning thousands of athletes and dozens of sports shows that we need to resist the seductive pull of blocked practice and embrace the productive struggle of variability. This doesn't mean all practice should be random. Beginners need some blocking to understand basic patterns. Experts might benefit from focused work on specific weaknesses. Motivation and confidence sometimes need to take priority over optimal learning. But for most learners, most of the time, more variability in practice will lead to better long-term outcomes, even when it doesn't feel that way in the moment. The broader lesson extends beyond sports and skill learning to life itself. The experiences that challenge us, that force us to adapt and adjust, that prevent us from falling into comfortable routines, these are often the experiences that produce the most growth. The contextual interference effect is really telling us something profound about the nature of learning. It's not about avoiding struggle, but about engaging with the right kind of struggle, the kind that builds capability rather than just demonstrating it. So the next time you're practicing anything, remember the paradox. If it feels too easy, you're probably not learning as much as you could be. Mix it up, embrace the errors, tolerate the frustration, and trust that the struggle is building something stronger than comfort ever could. Because in learning, as in life, the path of most resistance often leads to the greatest growth. This is Esther Adams with Strides to Solutions.